My name is Bobby, and I've always been fascinated by the human psyche. What drives people to do the things that they do? In this small, unassuming neighborhood, at the end of the street, is where the first of 3 victims was found of Dallas's only serial killer on record. I've come down to Oak Cliff to try to piece together what I can figure out about the Texas eyeball killer. "1990 was not exactly the best year for Dallas. That year saw the highest spike in the number of homicides within the city limits, hitting an astounding 500 murders total. South of downtown and across the river lies a large area of town known as Oak Cliff. Today, Oak Cliff is a charming and trendy part of town. But 30 years ago, the streets of Oak Cliff, particularly the main street, Jefferson Boulevard, was saturated by gangs, drugs, and sex workers. 2 Dallas police officers, Regina Williams and John Matthews, were assigned to the Oak Cliff beat. Their mission was to do what they could to clean up the area and try to bring it back to life as it once was. Being on patrol there daily, the officers became acquainted with a lot of the women and were on a first-name basis with most. On the early morning of December 13, 1990, a resident on the 8800 block of Beckley View in South Dallas came upon what he thought was a mannequin out near the street outside his house. But as he approached, he quickly realized it was the body of a woman. She was found stripped of everything except her t-shirt and bra, which were pulled up over her chest. Her eyes were shut, and there appeared to be blood and bruising on her face and chest. She had been posed in a provocative manner. He was so mortified by the sight that he brought a flowered bedsheet from his house to cover her up until the police arrived. One of the officers immediately recognized the victim as 33-year-old Mary Lou Pratt. She was a veteran sex worker who frequented the Star Motel in Oak Cliff, which was a popular destination for taking their clients for business. While the ladies often called for help due to abusive clients, it was rare to find one of them murdered, especially someone as well-liked as Mary. During the autopsy, it was concluded that Mary had been beaten severely before she was killed. The pathologist noted the bullet hole in the back of her head. The fatal head wound came from a .44 caliber handgun. But then the pathologist let out a gasp when she opened Mary's eyes. Both of her eyeballs were missing. They had been removed with such surgical precision that the upper and lower eyelids were left unobstructed. Investigators contacted the FBI's Violent Crimes Apprehension Program Unit, which stores all of the nation's most gruesome murders on its database. They were hoping to match this kind of murder with others on file. However, it was reported that no records of anything like the murder of Mary Pratt were found. The murder was a dumped body case, one of the most difficult types to solve since the victim was killed in one location and dropped off in another. There was also very little forensic evidence. Today, the street where Mary Lou Pratt was found hasn't changed much since 1990. Later that day, Officer Matthews spotted a girl named Veronica at the Star 8 Motel. She looked disheveled and appeared to have been beaten up pretty badly. She told Officer Matthews that on the previous evening, a man had tried to kill her. She told him she barely escaped with only a wound to her head, having hidden from him in the dark of the night until she could get to a friend's place for help. Unfortunately, there wasn't much the officer could do for her at that time. The next day, Officer Matthews saw Veronica again, this time in a light blue truck with a man who Matthews suspected was a client and tried to arrest him. Veronica intervened and begged Matthews not to arrest him and insisted that he was the friend who had saved her from her attacker. The driver was a man named Axton Schindler, but was known around town as Speedy. The address on his driver's license listed a home on El Dorado Avenue, which was a couple of miles from the Star 8 Motel. Speedy said he had a wife named Dixie and that he and Veronica were just friends. The officer let them go and passed the story on to the homicide unit just in case it proved to be significant in any way. 2 months later, on February 10, 1991, another prostitute, 27-year-old Susan Peterson, was found murdered. She was nearly nude with her t-shirt pulled up to display her chest in the same manner as Mary Lou Pratt. She'd been shot 3 times in the top of her head, and had been dumped in South Dallas, not too far from where Mary Lou Pratt was found. When the autopsy was conducted, the medical examiner found that this victim bore a grisly similarity to Pratt. Her eyes had been surgically removed. There had been no bleeding and only 2 small cuts. Here is the area today where Susan Peterson was found. The fact that her body was in the same neighborhood as Mary Pratt's helped establish a zone of familiarity. The offender likely lived or worked in the area and was almost certainly a resident of Dallas, rather than a roving stranger passing through town. Officer Matthews and Williams remembered the story Veronica had told them and wondered if there was a connection after all. However, Veronica was a known liar and generally made little sense, but the details of her story hadn't changed since she first told Matthews, which made it more credible. In confidence, she added that she had actually witnessed Mary Pratt being murdered. However, she could not remember the location of the house where all of this took place. Based on the 2 murders, investigators soon came up with a profile for the killer. They believed the killer was probably white and would therefore only target white prostitutes, as he had done twice already. A killer who mutilates might have other strange fetishes as well and probably has a history of mental instability. They also believed that the offender had some medical background due to the precision of the surgical extraction of the eyeballs. A little over a month later, on March 18, 1991, despite stepped-up police patrols all over Oak Cliff, a black part-time sex worker, 41-year-old Shirley Williams, was murdered. Her nude body was found laying on its side out by a curb near an elementary school in the heart of Oak Cliff. She was posed, laying in a pool of blood on the street as children walked to school. A red, unused condom was found close to her body. The first thing the medical examiner did when they arrived at the scene was to roll back the eyelids. The eyeballs were gone. This was indeed the work of Dallas's first documented serial killer. Shirley also had facial bruises and a broken nose, probably from being punched, and she had been shot through the top of her head and in the face. The killer left no fingerprints or biological evidence. There was a difference in this murder as compared to Mary Lou Pratt and Susan Peterson, however. The killer had not been nearly as careful this time as he removed the eyes. He'd slashed at her face as if he did not know quite how to perform this deed, and in the eye socket, he'd broken off the tip of what turned out to be an X-Acto knife. Investigators speculated that he'd been in a rush or was interrupted by something. Here is the location of where Shirley Williams was found today. It was later indicated that Shirley had been with friends the night before. She had told her daughter she would be home later that night. It had been raining, so Williams put on a yellow slicker. The friend said that she got into a car, and that was the last that anyone had seen of her. Another prostitute, known as Brenda, recalled to officers that a few evenings before Shirley was murdered, a white man had tried to kill her. She described him as an older man with salt and pepper hair who drove a green or brown station wagon. She thought she recalled a mustache and a slight beard stubble. He invited her into his car and wanted to take her somewhere. She resisted and suggested they get a room at the hotel, since it was familiar to her and she felt more secure there. This angered him, and he started shouting about how prostitutes do him wrong. This frightened Brenda enough to spray him in the face with mace. He continued driving and wouldn't stop, so she jumped from the car while it was still moving. The experience had shaken her. Investigators believe that Shirley was murdered in the area, probably outside somewhere, and that her clothing might turn up. A yellow slicker would be pretty easy to spot. However, searching the area around where the body was found, as well as around the motel, came up empty. They were also thrown by the fact that Shirley Williams was African American and totally against what they came up with when they profiled the offender. On closer inspection of Shirley Williams' body, they discovered some hairs from the back of her neck that did not appear to be hers. After examining their pattern, shape, and consistency, they concluded that these hairs yielded from someone of a different race. The hairs were identified as hairs coming from a Caucasian. It wasn't much to go on, and it didn't help the police to track someone down, but it would come in handy once the suspect was identified. Investigators also concluded that the gun that killed Mary Lou Pratt was identified by ballistic labs as the same one that had killed Shirley Williams. That was good, since the Williams mutilation could have easily been problematic in court for a linkage analysis. And while a different gun had been used on Susan Peterson, her mutilation was so similar to Mary Lou Pratt's that there would be no trouble claiming that those crimes were linked by a single offender. Now that 3 sex workers had been murdered in their territory, Officer Matthews and Officer Williams wanted to dive deeper into Veronica's story about seeing Mary Lou Pratt's murder. They recalled the man they had stopped, Axton Schindler, a.k.a. Speedy, and decided to run a check on his address. When they looked it up, they found that the property was listed in the name of Fred Albright, who owned some other properties near where the first body had been found. But upon further research, they found that Albright was deceased. This was curious. The officers thought the last name Albright sounded vaguely familiar, and then remembered that a few days earlier, a frightened woman had called the deputy constable to discuss a man named Charles Albright. She referred to him as a customer, but was vague as to what her profession was. She claimed that he would come see her frequently and would bring her gifts. She said that her fellow workers did not like him, but she decided to go out with him anyway. It wasn't long before she would regret her decision. Although he was married, he'd convinced her to move into one of his rental properties so that he could come by at any time to be with her. She said that his demands became weirder until he outright scared her with what she claimed was his obsession with knives and eyes. She quickly moved out, got married, and moved on with her life. However, she remained afraid, even years later, that he would find her and kill her. The best bit of information she offered was that she was aware that Mary Lou Pratt and Albright had been acquainted. Officers then looked into Charles Albright's history, and it turned out he had a long criminal record, including a conviction for aggravated assault on a child. Not only that, a woman named Dixie popped up in the records, and the officers recalled that Axton Schindler had referred to his wife as Dixie. The facts and associations were growing more compelling by the minute. Both Brenda and Veronica were shown some photos to see if they could pick out the man whom they were telling police about. Mixed in the photos were pictures of both Axton and Charles. Brenda pointed to a photo of Charles Albright without hesitation. Veronica, however, didn't want to cooperate at first, but in the end she too selected Albright as her attacker. That was 2 for 2. 4 days after Shirley Williams was murdered, the police had a warrant in hand for Albright's arrest and a plan to apprehend him. With both Brenda and Veronica's allegations against him, he could be charged with attempted murder and attempted assault. Investigators could hold him and search for better evidence against him for the 3 murders. A couple of hours after midnight on March 22nd, the Dallas SWAT team, as well as Officers Williams and Matthews, came together and surrounded Albright's Oak Cliff home on El Dorado. At the signal, they moved in. They asked Albright where Axton was, but he seemed confused by the question. Later, it was revealed that Axton had simply used Albright's address on his license. He did not live there. Albright and Dixie were taken to the police station for interrogation, while investigators searched their house and prepared to look at other properties listed under Albright's deceased father's name. Investigators recovered debris from a vacuum cleaner, as well as a Smith & Wesson .44 caliber revolver, the type of gun they were looking for. They would have to test it to be certain it was the murder weapon that killed Mary Pratt and Shirley Williams.
Yeah, I just couldn't believe it. He was a real nice person. Bring us souvenirs back when he went to vacation, watched our house.
For 3 years, Maura Paramo and her family have lived next door to 57-year-old Charles Albright. They were shocked Friday when police came to the home and arrested the repairman for attempting to kill a prostitute last December. Police say that prostitute got away and talked, and now neighbors are even more surprised to learn that police have charged Albright with shooting to death, then mutilating the faces of 2 other prostitutes. 46-year-old Shirley Williams killed earlier this month, and 33-year-old Mary Lou Pratt murdered last December. The death of a 3rd prostitute, killed in similar fashion, is still under investigation. Police say the man they arrested here, Charles Albright, was a well-known customer of prostitutes, and that information supplied by prostitutes was instrumental in filing the murder charges.
The prostitutes did have fear of the suspect in this case, but they, on occasion, would talk to us.
Police say Albright may have met the women at this hotel in Oak Cliff. Their bodies were all found in remote South Dallas. While police say they have physical evidence to link Albright to the killings, they refuse to give details of that evidence. Neighbors hear with relief, however, that police know of no other deaths beyond these 3 that may be linked to a suspect that some had called a serial killer. Shelley Koffler, Texas News 5.
In the early morning hours, Albright was finally questioned. He adamantly denied knowing any of the murder victims or any sex workers and refused to admit that he had anything to do with the murders. He pointed out that his criminal record was for property crimes. He did know Axton as one of his tenants, but did not know why his address was on the man's driver's license. Axton was later brought in for questioning since he had been with Veronica and knew something about the assault. He told police that Veronica had never brought Albright to his place, although police firmly believed that he had. Axton remained a viable suspect as well, especially by Albright's friends. He insisted that it was not Albright from whom he had saved Veronica, but rather a Hispanic male whom he did not know. Despite his loose association, he was never as solid a suspect as Albright was. But even with him, there were questions. Albright's background, even filled as it was with accomplishments, supported the possibility of a diagnosis of a psychopath, which is the manipulative, intelligent charmer who lies easily, exploits others, and honors only himself without remorse for harm he may do to others. Such people are slick and secretive, and even people close to them may be fooled by their facade. He was born on August 10, 1933. His mother, Dell, and father, Fred, had adopted him from an orphanage, and it was clear from the start that Dell was in control. She was a strict grade school teacher and used that position to shape and form her precocious young son. She doted on him and overprotected him, but did not show much outward affection. She sometimes dressed him as a girl and gave him a doll to play with. She also accelerated his education, getting him skipped ahead 2 grades. When he was old enough to be given a gun, he killed small animals and told his mother he wanted to be a taxidermist. So she helped him to learn how to skin and stuff his dead birds. His products were lifelike, but he was not allowed to complete them with the glass eyes sold in taxidermy shops because they were too expensive and Dell was frugal to the extreme. Instead, she had him use buttons. In other words, eyes were forbidden. He may well have developed a desire to get the eyes that his mother had denied him. He graduated from high school at the age of 15 with the help of forged transcripts, and he got into North Texas State University. However, at 16, the police caught him with some petty cash from a cash register, 2 handguns, and a rifle. For that, despite Dell's strenuous efforts on his behalf, he received a year in jail. Once free, he set out to be a productive citizen, enrolling at Arkansas State Teachers College and majoring in pre-med studies. He graduated, married his college girlfriend, and took up a seemingly normal life. They soon had a daughter. The marriage fell apart in 1965. He and his wife separated, finally divorcing in 1974. The marriage was done, but his criminal activities were not. In fact, he grew bolder. He was caught stealing hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise from a hardware store and received 2 years prison sentence. Yet he served less than 6 months before he was out again. He worked hard to become more presentable, converted to Catholicism, and surrounded himself with people from the parish. In 1985, he met Dixie in Arkansas. After his father died, he invited her to come and live in his house. It wasn't long before she was paying the bills from her menial job, even taking out a loan to do so. The case against Albright seemed to be falling apart. Investigators were unable to find evidence that any murder had been committed at Albright's house, nor did they find any bloody clothes or shoes, although they did find socks and underwear soaking in bleach. Worse, his .44 caliber gun tested negatively as the gun that killed Mary Lou Pratt and Shirley Williams. The only thing prosecutors had was circumstantial evidence. They were able to detain him on the charge of attempted murder while they continued to build a case. There was also evidence from hair analysis. The police confiscated blankets from Albright's trucks and sent them in to be tested, along with the debris from Albright's vacuum cleaner. The blankets had hair and fibers, as did the debris. The hair in the vacuum debris was consistent with Shirley Williams. There were not enough strands to perform the type of DNA analysis used at that time. Albright agreed to let police take hair and blood samples from him, and it was soon discovered that hair found on one of the bodies was consistent with Albright's hair sample. In addition, hair found on the blankets from the trucks appeared to match hair from the victims. Because of the lack of concrete evidence, a grand jury reduced the capital murder charges down to murder, so the death penalty was off the table. Eventually, the district attorney's office settled on prosecuting Albright for only one murder, Shirley Williams, without explaining why they were doing so. However, it's assumed that it was because they had stronger evidence tying Albright to her murder as opposed to the other 2 victims. The trial began in December of 1991, 1 year after Mary Lou Pratt had been killed. If you like the content of this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified when new videos are posted.